what's the sequence of events leading to your selection as vice president? I mean, you had some conversations with Win Navziger?
Yeah, I think I told Lynn, I can't remember, I think after it was pretty well determined, of course it was late at night. I don't think Ford ever thought about a vice president until what, after midnight?
So so in other words, what you're saying is, there's no campaign going in advance of the convention. This is really a last minute.
I went out there, remember Noel Cook, a pretty good speechwriter, and he and I and Elizabeth, that was our team. The three of us went out there and had a room in the Mulebach, and we were thinking, well, you know, he's got trouble with the Farm Belt, veterans, all that stuff. I've been a pretty loyal Republican, been chairman of the party. And now the favorite, of course, was John Connally. And all the TV cameras were hanging around his room, and we were down the hall. And, you know, I've read, I don't know precisely what happened, but apparently at 1 or 2 o'clock they had a discussion, then they broke up for an hour or two, and then they got back together again. And they started talking about names, and my name came up, and I always thought the guy that might poison me would be Mel Laird. Not that he didn't like me, but he was always the kind of guy that would put poison in the water upstream and then go into the city and ask what's going on here, you know. I mean, I mean it as a compliment. This guy was smart.
He was good at it.
He was good at it. And he may have had another candidate, but Bob Griffin was a friend of mine, and then I know Rockefeller put in a good word, and then somebody, I think, ran the name by Reagan, and he said no problem, in effect, no problem with him. Of course, they're already looking at the next election. They probably, well, if this guy, we can beat that guy, you know. Maybe they thought I was weak, so that probably wouldn't, who knows what their real thinking was. But Lynn was a friend, and I think he might have passed the word on to Reagan. You know, he's a good guy. We worked together in RNC. And
I can tell you, I know that Connally was never seriously considered, because Connally refused in advance of the Texas primary when Ford asked him more than once for his support.
Oh.
And Connally had more than one, Connally wanted more than one meeting with the president at the White House, but Connally wouldn't do anything. And Ford didn't forget. And my sense is that Howard Baker started out as probably front runner. Ruckelshaus was seriously.
Ruckelshaus, they were flying him in, Anna Armstrong.
Anna Armstrong, yeah,
Yeah, I was convinced it was going to be Ruckelshaus because he was flying in from the West Coast or somewhere. And I told Liz, well, looks like, you know, he's from a key state, Indiana, and generally when we win. But at least a bigger state than Kansas, sort of Midwest, maybe in those days, maybe a little too close to Michigan, but not to make any difference by geography. But
I think they also thought that was a way to offset Watergate. I mean, this is a guy who, you know, had
yeah, and I've been chairman of the party, so, you know, always, even though Senator Irvin made a specific finding that I wasn't involved, we had plenty of people showing up with signs, pardon me, you know. But then I remember the interview after the election with Barbara Walters when she had asked me, did you cost Ford the election? Yeah. Well, you really talking about cutting your legs off, you know. So.
But you heard, I remember you saying you heard from other people like Hubert Humphrey.
Yeah. We went down that ice cream. So, you know, they got to find a scapegoat. It's going to be somebody else. And Because he'd been through the same thing. If he'd have done this, he'd have won. If he'd have done it, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know what they were blaming me for. Maybe the Democratic war and the debate, which came right out of the playbook. I mean, I didn't,
Now, who put the playbook together? I mean,
well, I talked to Kissinger and all these big shots, I don't know whether White House or somebody put it together. I didn't.
Yeah, it wasn't something that your campaign put together.
So I didn't dream up the Democratic wars. But
what kind of relationship had you had with Mondale before that?
pretty good. We were on the same committee, finance. Even afterwards, I took him up when he was named ambassador to Japan, introduced him along with a couple others. We were friends. He's been out at the Institute. I have a letter on my desk saying what a great place it is and wish they were doing as well and all that stuff, But
what kind of preparation did you do for that debate?
we spent a lot of time in a hotel room. 3 days, and different people would come in. At the time, you're ready. Here comes the economic guy. You're going to remember.
I mean, how much value can you prepare for the debate?
So I think I'd have been better off if I hadn't done anything. I don't mean that. Just let me do it myself instead of trying to get all the stuff in your mind that somebody else. And I don't say they're not good preparation and good information, but maybe it's not you, it's somebody else speaking.
Yeah.
So, I don't say you shouldn't prepare at all. Remember, of course, in 96, it was Fred Thompson who played Bill Clinton. Did a good job in the debate prep. I'm not sure how many people watched VP debates then, but the press went with the Democratic wars thing.
Did you sense, now, at what point did someone say to you that was a mistake? Or did anyone say, other than the press?
No, in fact, Mel Laird called me and said it was great. And he liked my line about who was a big labor leader, would have been on the ticket, but he couldn't afford to give up his job, the big cigar smoking guy.
George Meany, or?
Yeah, George Meany, yeah. But,
how did your operation mesh with the board?
We didn't have any. That was another problem. Ford, that he was so busy getting the nomination, can't fault him for it. So the last thing he was worried about is what's going to happen with the number 2 guy or gal or whoever. And I think Ann Armstrong was a pretty, she was on the list for quite a while. I remember on my first trip, I can't remember, where did we go, to Legion Convention or somewhere? I just had a couple of guys with me. We got on a commercial flight, which is fine, flew out there, gave a speech, somebody threw together, and that was it. And then later we started getting a little more structure, but not much.
Now, did
Gerson was one of our speechwriters, and John McConnell, who, I think, is McConnell still at the White House?
Yeah.
Gerson's being accused of plagiarism.
Yeah. Did Nofziger travel with you in that campaign?
Yeah, he traveled with me a while. Of course, he always wanted me to take somebody's head off, so. You gotta be tough in this business.
But he was a happy warrior, though, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, he loved this stuff. He just loved to needle Democrats, that he could remind me of something of Schumer, but he's not quite as nasty as Schumer. He'd get up in the morning thinking, what can I do to ring their bell today? So, And he always, he always had these terrible jokes you had to listen to. Puns, I guess he called them.
Now,
But he was a good guy, good-hearted guy, and he later had, but he never spent any jail time, did I think he had to pay a fine
yeah.
for some lobbying infraction, both he and Mike Deaver.
The whole Rose Garden strategy, I mean, I assume you weren't really consulted on that. That was something that they decided, in the White House.
He was going to be at work, getting the nation's work done, and, well, I used to say, they sent me out on the briar patch, and he was in the Rose Garden, so.
Well, there's this wonderful story, and you can see Stu Spencer saying this, right about that.
Pardon?
When Stu Spencer says because Ford wants to go out and campaign, Ford likes to campaign. And Stu Spencer says, "You don't understand, Mr. President, you're an effing lousy campaigner." Now, I don't know any other president you could talk to like that.
No, but you could to Ford.
Yeah.
And but when he got out there, maybe if he'd have gone a day or two earlier, he might have won. He got on that train, went all over, people liked him, and he couldn't get away from the pardon. I don't care what.
Did that keep coming up in your travels? I mean,
It came up, not always directly. I mean, after the press had their couple of flings, well, but the people are always out there with signs, they're going to get on TV, and it's going to remind people every day of what Ford did. Pardon me, Mr. President. What else? And then there was some allegation that I'd taken money from a guy named Claude Wild with Gulf Oil Company, who had given me and Inouye, and I don't know, there were 15 or 20 of us he'd given cash to, which I don't think was illegal at the time, but he apparently gave it secretly. But what he did when he pleaded guilty, he left off the names of the guys he liked. so whether Bill Katz got it, which he says he can't recall, probably did, but Danny and I and others were not involved, but they spent a lot of time on that, and they came to my office. They went, what's his name? Washington Post, starts with a P, Pincus.
yeah.
He spent a week going through all my files, all my records. He couldn't find anything, so that was out there for a while. But
Did Watergate change the climate?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, everybody's asking you questions they probably wouldn't ask you before, but compared to today, I mean, it was pretty tame. In '76.
What kinds of places did you go to? I mean, I assume, a lot of rural
Yeah.
settings?
I don't remember I remember, can't remember where the state fair was in Minnesota. Where was it? That's when I announced they're going to raise prices. I got a call from President Ford. He said, "Just so you know, in the future, I will make those kind of announcements." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. President." I got the message. I think that's the only time in the whole election that he ever called, so I think you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Because, and I shouldn't have been doing that. Here I am out at the state fair with some Republican congressman, Mankato,
Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
Rainy, wet, muddy. Yeah, I don't remember.
What kind of contact was there between the two campaigns? Any kind of formal
Liaison.
consultation between, your operation and his, or was it more?
I think it was sort of
I mean, just in terms of coordinating strategy.
I don't say we were freelancing, but,
Now, there's a story that one day you got out a map
Yeah, so let's go here. We turned around midair and said, let's go back visit somewhere. We didn't know what to do. That's probably a true story. I can't remember. But, so we weren't, I would say that was an exception, but, I think the Ford people would say, well, we ought to send Dole down here, and they might say, well, today's money, maybe you ought to go there tomorrow, or maybe you ought to go there, whatever you had planned, you had to change. And, I think he had a lot of, he trusted me, so he didn't, the only thing he ever cautioned me was don't have too many wisecracks, that was, so, said we don't need a comedian or whatever, Jack Benny, or, well, that was Huck Boyd, Jack Benny line. But he said, do you think you can control your sense of humor? I said, well, probably, I'll try, or something like that.
You go to I think Darlington, to the car race down there, and just reading the media coverage, you got a sense you felt a little bit like a fish out of water. I mean, just the culture of...
well, and Carter was there.
Right.
I was talking about... I'd never been to a race like that before anyway. And, well, I learned later on in life what a great opportunity that is. But...
at some point, I think he said something about how he was going to invite everyone to the White House, and you had some great line about how they're going to have to enlarge the place to.
Did I say that at the race?
I think so.
I probably did. Well, I figured they'd all come. If it happened, we'd make way for him somehow.
Was he a difficult opponent to run against? I mean, he seems, and I don't mean the word slippery in a negative way, but I mean ideologically, you couldn't really pin him down. Because he actually ran against Ford from the right in some ways.
Yeah, he was...
outsider.
Outsider. He had a Naval Academy graduate, smart guy, been a governor, peanut farmer. I saw so many of those little peanuts on people's... That was his little button. And... we used to joke that we thought Mondale was a suburb in California. But he was pretty, and of course he wouldn't campaign on weekends. He'd shut it down and went on Friday night, which was probably smart. He wasn't going to gain press anyway. He'd go back to Plains and then start again on Monday. But, there was a big gap which we started to close, and it was closing and closing and closing after people finally had about all the Nixon pardon they could swallow. But the economy wasn't all that good, and the wind stuff was kind of made fun of, and I was trying to think... Well, we were given orders, be sure we reminded people how smart Ford was. What was he, top number 3 in his class at Yale, and All-American football player, because people said he'd slipped a couple of times coming out down the plane.
That's right. But the great story, I mean, it's so Ford. Kennerly was at the foot of the plane. Of course, Kennerly was a smartass, and Ford slipped down. And Kennerly says, "Nice of you to drop in." and then later on, people around Ford, of course, everyone around a president, their job is to tell him how great he is, and they were criticizing photographers. Ford says, "Well, but of course they took the picture. They would have lost their jobs if they didn't."
Yeah.
Which tells you something about what Ford is.
It didn't bother Ford.
But then, of course, there was the Polish gaffe. I mean, people talk about Democrat wars, but I mean, the fact is, he said it, and then, of course, he's stubborn, and he dug in his heels.
And then he wouldn't back off for days, or the whole weekend, as I remember.
Right.
And I think in his heart, he knew he was probably right. I mean, the people were free, but not really, you know.
Did you have any conversation with him during that time?
I can't recall any. It certainly took me off the hook for all of my previous sins.
But then in the last couple weeks, I mean, the momentum.
He got out on the road, did a great job, and he used to, in the last couple of weeks, he had called me. I remember once I was in New Mexico, and he just wanted to let me know that we're really doing great, and, you know, don't give up, and keep working hard, and don't, you know, in other words, stay on the message, don't get something that they'll go after us on, sort of little pep talks that, you know, we're closing the gap, and he was right. I'm sure we had the same numbers, but what was it, 8,000 votes in Ohio or 3,000 in Hawaii or something?
And election night, were you at the White House?
Yeah.
What was the...
That was sad. He went to bed before it was over. I remember we went home.
Who else was there? I think Joe Garagiola was there?
Let's see.
And somewhere I read Jake Javits was there, of all people.
Ford had this great friend in California. He and his wife were there.
That Leon Palmer?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Leon was there. I saw Leon, in fact, I saw Leon at the funeral.
Yeah.
I can't remember about the Ford family, but we were kind of seated up front,
Yeah.
and it wasn't good news, and it was torture sitting there, you know.
I mean, you sensed early on that it wasn't...
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, he did too. I mean, there wasn't much jubilation in the room. That can't happen. It seemed like there was something, some state early on didn't work out well. Couldn't have been Ohio.
Well, and of course, the South, you lost virtually the entire South.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what...
Including John Connolly's Texas. I think Connolly had assured Ford, you're going to win, and...
I can take Texas.
Yeah.
Did he carry any southern state? Did he carry Virginia? Yeah.
I think that's it. It's amazing in 30 years how the electoral map is totally reversed. Because remember, you also carried California, Oregon, Washington, New Jersey, Connecticut, Michigan. It's just like, you know, it's turned inside out.
Kind of an anti-southern, I think. Well, now that's how Fred Thompson thinks he's going to carry the South, and every southern state, plus a few more in the Midwest. See what happens.
You remember the first time you saw Ford after the election? I mean, I assume he acknowledged your work and...
Yeah, I don't remember whether we got together or I went to the White House. You know, he always said we were a good team. He repeated that over and over. Oh, we were a great team, you know. Don't feel bad about it, you know, don't...
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of guy he was. I mean, it was, you know, to say you did a hell of a lousy job, otherwise we would have won.
You are right, you know, by the way, people always talk about the pardon, and it was a factor. But if you go back and you look in the last week of that campaign, there were some economic numbers that were released that suggested at the very least that the economy had stalled.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered at the very end whether people sort of pulled back and just thought, you know, well, maybe I don't want a continuation of this.
Yeah.
I'll take a chance on change. And
They weren't excited about Carter. I mean, some people were, but I, you know, and in some cases they weren't too excited about Ford. I mean, maybe either ticket, you know, they weren't. But
Did you have any contact with Nixon during that campaign?
I contacted Reagan. They sent me to meet him at the Denver airport. I met him up in New Hampshire, and we're trying to get him to do some things.
Did you sense that he was sort of dragging his feet a bit?
Looking ahead. And I didn't sense that, but, hindsight's perfect.
Yeah.
I think it was more staff-driven, And let's face it, when he came back from up in the upper balcony that night and made that speech, that probably, and he probably didn't intend to do it, but that didn't help Ford any. All people talked about in that couple was Ronald Reagan's speech, not the president's. So that took 2 weeks off your campaign. So,
Did you get the bug? As a result of that campaign, when did you first think about 80, about yourself in terms of the...
I don't know when it was, but I probably shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't. It was probably a good thought, but should have been just left that way, a thought. But you think, well, I got a little name recognition, da-da-da. But if you somebody just said, Ronald Reagan's been working on this thing for 4 years, and it happened, and I got to be chairman of the finance committee, so it's a pretty good consolation prize.
What was your relationship like with President Carter?
Carter, it was okay. We didn't really have much contact. I've been to the White House, and I don't think he ever said any bad thing. I think I referred to him once as Southern Fried McGovern, but other than that, I was very nice. So.